Hello, Giants fans, and welcome to your Monday edition of the Valentine's Views podcast here on Big Blue View Radio, part of your SB Nation family of podcasts. If you're listening across our podcast network, please subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. If you're watching on YouTube, please like, share, subscribe there as well. And obviously, today we are just a few hours away from Monday Night Football, Giants versus arch rival Dallas Cowboys in what is going to be a whiteout, a madhouse at MetLife Stadium. And here to help me discuss it, break it all down, give us grief is the great RJ Ochoa of SB Nation's Blogging the Boys. RJ, how you doing?
Doing great, Ed. Happy Monday to you. It's a big week for any of the NFC East rivals when the Cowboys come to town. It's what every single team in the division that isn't Dallas looks forward to. So I'm happy that we could live up to your expectations a little bit.
Well, one thing that's going to be different this time, RJ, and we're not going to get into, back and forth about who's going to win, at least not yet, and all of that. But the last few times I've sat in the press box at MetLife Stadium and watched the Giants play the Cowboys, the fans that have been in the stadium, it's been 2/3 Cowboys, 2/3 Dallas fans. And I can guarantee you that that's not going to be the case tonight. It's Giants are 2-0. There's a lot of excitement, building about where this team might be headed with Brian Daboll, and I don't think that this is going to be a Dallas dominant crowd tonight.
I mean, obviously, Cowboys fans travel very well. But I'm with you. It's an exciting time for the Giants. I think beyond the record, I mean, you know better than I do. And I say this with all due respect for the staffs that have been with the Giants over the last few years. I think there's an excitement just about that, right? Like I think even if this team were 0-2, if the gambles that Brian Daboll had taken hadn't worked out, I think that he's kind of being well received at the very least for thinking for moving forward in those directions. Obviously, those breaks have gone New York's way, and so that adds to the excitement. It's been a long time since the Cowboys and Giants have played a game, especially in New York, that had some juice. I think the last one was probably 2016 when Dallas went there in December. There was a Sunday night game. You'll recall New York won, and it was, I think the final score was something like 10-3. Obviously, that was the last playoff year for the Giants, but that had a big kind of energy because both of them were so good that whole year. And that was the second loss of the year for the Cowboys, and both of them were to the Giants. It was just kind of a fun, little quirk to that magical run that Dallas had. But I'm excited. It's to your point, it's no longer just like this kind of footnote that you have to kind of flip through as you go through the year.
Well, you can call the Giants 2-0 start. Some people call it a mirage. Some people want to say, oh, the Giants are the worst 2-0 football team ever. And all of that's over the top, but it's also over the top to look at this football team and think, oh, the Giants are fixed. They're going to make a deep playoff run. They're going to win the NFC East. They're going to compete for the Super Bowl. Brian Daboll says it all the time. They're at the beginning. This roster, they've had one off season, they've had one draft, they've had one free agency period where they didn't have any money to spend. So they're at the beginning. We still don't know if Daniel Jones is the long-term quarterback, but I think beyond 2-0, I think there's just optimism that finally they've got the right people. They've got the right head coach. They might have the right GM in place to finally make some decisions that bring this team back to respectability. I don't know if that feels the same way from the outside.
No, totally. And again, I say this with all due respect. I was really upset when Joe Judge was fired. I was obviously really hoping he'd stick around. He just was clearly somebody kind of bringing the franchise down. I really applaud John Mara for kind of having a self, discussion, self conversation, and realizing that things needed to change. And to, I think if I were a Giants fan, I would, and it's hard, right? It's hard to kind of measure and gauge your own optimism and the fun that you want to have throughout a football season. But to your point, you have to understand that this is the beginning. and anything you're doing, anything you're accomplishing is house money. Brandon Gouton, our friend from Bleeding Green Nation, has compared this Giants team to last year's Lions team, right? Like if you can just be cute, you can be spoiler, you can show promise. And I think, we're only 2 weeks in, but I think the Giants have shown more than last year's Lions did, at least through the first 2 weeks, in that, like how often would the Giants have gone for it on fourth down to win the game, or gone for a 2-point conversion, or been that aggressive? You're right that I don't know that any of the players on this roster are for the long term of this project, but if you're a Giants fan, I definitely think you might not be able to buy a jersey and rep the name on the back for that much longer, because there might be some turnover that's yet to come, but you can certainly rep the name that's on the front. You can certainly feel pride in your Giants. You can have fun. I mean, it's got to be a fun time to be a New York fan, whether that's Yankees or Mets. I mean, both of them are going to lose in the playoffs to the Houston Astros, obviously, but still, that's what makes this time of year fun. And I have to imagine you're having so much more fun than you have through September, which is saying something, than you have in a very long time.
Well, since you went to baseball, I'm not going to argue much about the Astros, because when my Yankees beat the Astros, then I'll believe that they can beat the Astros. Okay.
Okay.
I want to see it. I need to see it. Jose Altuve needs to go crying and whimpering off into the offseason, but I'll believe that they can when I see it. But so people know, we are recording on Friday afternoon. I have one wish for the weekend as we do this. Come on, Boston Red Sox, will you please throw Aaron Judge strikes so that by Monday, by the time this show airs, he's got 62 home runs, and I can stop, planning my days around when the Yankees are going to be on TV.
That's such a fun quirk to sports, right? This past Monday night, when we had the doubleheader Monday Night Football game, and obviously, look, I love all football like you do, and the Eagles are playing. I'm a big believer in the Vikings, and so I wanted to watch both of those games. But the Astros, to kind of stick with baseball, we're in the process of clinching the AL West, and so I really wanted to enjoy that. So I was trying to watch 2 football games and to watch an Astros game. So there's a lot of managing my iPad and things like that. I'm really the champion that made it through that. But
multiple devices, RJ, multiple devices.
We live in an interesting time, certainly. but no, I mean, it's going to be fun. It's a fun energy around New York. I think the energy is probably better around the Giants than it is the Jets. I mean, and I know that doesn't really matter to a lot of Giants fans, but I mean, I think the Jets are only trending down. I know they had a big win, in week 2, but it's hard to buy that there's a long-term success rate that's going to happen with that organization. Whereas I do feel like, I don't know if Brian Dable is going to be able to replicate what he did with Josh Allen, but I do feel like there are at least adults in the room, and adults making legitimate roster and team and franchise decisions. And that hasn't been the case. I'll tell you, I'm a big fan of Brian Dable not acquiescing and playing Kenny Golladay. I love that. I love that Brian Dable is not saying, you know what, this guy's got a big contract, I got to get him on the field. Who cares? Like, who cares? If he's not a good enough player, he can't play for me. So I'm a big fan of Brian Dable, although I hope he loses all of his games, obviously.
I agree with you about the Golladay situation, RJ, but I think that one thing that Giants fans need to understand, and this, it is much easier for Joe Shane and Brian Dable to look at Kenny Golladay and say, we didn't pay him that money. We didn't sign him to that contract. He's not our player. We can move on from him. If they want to move on from Daniel Jones, it's much easier because they don't have to explain the pick. Their reputations aren't tied to the money they spent on Golladay. It's harder if it's your draft pick or your big free agent signing. But I agree with you. If they think David Sills is a better player, then David Sills should play.
Yeah, and I think that, that's such a great point. And one, I think that we're seeing them exercise. We don't see that with a lot of teams. That's kind of the problem with the Cowboys as an example, right? Like, you can have head coach turnovers, staff turnovers, offensive, defensive coordinators, but you've had the same level of ownership, same GM in that sense, and Jerry Jones. So there is no true ever start over rebrand the way you get with conventional teams that have an independent general manager, an independent head coach. And so that's kind of just life with the Cowboys. That's part of what makes it unique. That's why I kind of like my Astros fandom. It allows me to feel like a more normal fan with the way a normal team operates. But the Cowboys certainly stumble into some nice draft picks of their own. phone. One of them that's tearing it up is somebody I know you wanted for the Giants a year and a half ago at this point, Micah Parsons. He's kind of keeping the ship afloat all by himself.
Oh, so let's talk about Micah Parsons. And I know that I still get emails and questions to my Big Blue View mailbag. Why didn't the Giants draft Micah Parsons? And the fact of the matter is, RJ, you remember there were questions about Parsons,
Sure, there were character concerns.
not about his talent. There were character concerns. There were diva concerns. There were, to be honest, a lot of the concerns that we heard in this draft cycle about Kayvon Thibodeau.
Mm-hmm.
Same type of thing. What kind of personality was he going to be? And I keep reminding people that the Giants were a bad football team. And we screamed for years about, stop doing things like drafting running backs number 2 overall. Trade down, acquire some assets, get a second first round pick, get extra players, build the roster. And Dave Gettleman always said, well, when you do that, you run the risk of leaving a really good player there. And the Giants left 2 all-pro caliber players on the board when they made that choice. They left Parsons and they left Slater there. And that's part of the fallout.
It's, that's still kind of a debate. Honestly, it's funny you bring that up between Cowboys fans. I don't think there's anybody who regrets drafting Micah Parsons, but you look at, the day Tyron Smith was hurt a few weeks ago, your mind wondered, right? Like, would this team be better off with Rashawn Slater? And I think to be fair to Giants fans, or to be fair to the Giants rather, an important point to remember with Micah is that he was evaluated as an off-ball linebacker. That was the evaluation coming into the NFL. And to your point, it's not the best utilization of resources to take a running back with the 2nd overall pick or the 4th overall pick, things that these 2 teams have done. The Cowboys did take an off-ball linebacker. Granted, it wasn't with the 10th overall pick because they traded back with Philly, but that's too rich. That's too rich of a pick to spend on that. Now, obviously, Micah became this incredible pass rusher, and you're more than willing to spend that resource or any resource on something like that, but that wasn't known at the time, and I don't know, I don't want to take anything away from Micah, but does he become that in New York?
Let me correct you on one thing. It was known to one person at Big Blue View who wrote that the best edge defender in the 2021 draft class is Micah Parsons.
Well, it was, all due credit, but it was still a bit of an unknown thing because there was such a small sample size, and even now we still have that debate, on the Cowboys side of things, like, should he play there full time? He's just such a unique player in that sense, and so I'm thrilled with the pick, obviously, but yeah, you can make an argument that the Giants erred in trading back. The Kadarius Toney pick probably doesn't make you feel great, at least a year and change in.
Well, the Kadarius Toney pick doesn't make you feel good. You're right. But what I said at the time, and what I will still say, is you have to look at the sum total of what happens here. The Giants got Kadarius Toney. They got a 5th round pick that last year that they used to move up and draft Aaron Robinson, who's one of their starting cornerbacks. Won't play Monday night because he's out with appendicitis. But so they got Kadarius Toney. They got Aaron Robinson. This year they got Daniel Bellinger in the 4th round, who is their starting tight end. And oh, by the way, they got a 1st round pick that turned into number 7 overall, which turned into Evan Neal. So you can make the argument that either Evan Neal or Kayvon Thibodeau, one of those 2 guys is not a Giant without that trade. Sure. So I think Giants fans have to realize that Micah Parsons is a great player. But if Kayvon Thibodeau turns into a great edge defender, or Evan Neal turns into a 10-year answer at right tackle, you've got that plus all of the other pieces that you ended up with.
And that's a great point. It's just, I'm sure you run into this problem. It's so hard for people to be patient, right? Especially,
exactly.
you probably talk to Giants fans, just be patient. This process has to bear itself out. Why should I be patient? We've waited, it's been At this point, what, 12, 11 years since they've won the division. It's been 6 years since a playoff appearance. Like, we've been patient long enough. The boat photo, the record since the boat photo, like all those things. It's just, it's hard. I mean, it's hard to win in the NFL, which is why Cowboys fans are so frustrated with their team and the way that the front office went about building their roster, seemingly leaving them ill prepared for the season to come.
And it's interesting. Let's talk about the Cowboys roster in the 2022 season. I just did this week. I did my Q&A, my 5 questions, traded with Dave Halpern from your staff. And Dave and I have been doing those 5 questions for like maybe 100 years or so. I think we've been
you guys did
them
on Rock and Chisel, I think, at first.
I think so. I think, we did them. I'm pretty sure that is how we did them back in 2007. but it's interesting because I saw the headline on your site. You guys picked up on the quote that I gave Dave that to me, this Cowboys roster is not scary. And here's what I meant. I look at the Cowboys, and the Cowboys have been good. All right. They haven't gotten over the top. They haven't gotten to the Super Bowl. They haven't won the big prize, but they've been good. And I've looked at their roster for years now and said the roster is better than their performance. They've underachieved. I don't look at this Cowboys roster and I just don't look at this roster and think it's as good as it's been the last few years. And that's what I simply meant by it's not scary to me.
I don't think that's unfair. The major moves over the offseason for the Cowboys were cutting Lyle Collins, who they just beat. And so now every Cowboys fan, feels like the front office was right? Oh, look, they beat Lyle. The decision was totally sound. They traded away Amari Cooper. You mentioned we're recording Friday afternoon. He caught another touchdown on Thursday night. Still looks like a serviceable wide receiver. They didn't recoup any legitimate value for him in an offseason that saw all sorts of wide receiver movement and first round picks being traded. And not to say that Amari was worth that, but he was certainly worth more than a 5th round pick. And the problem with that is, fine, you want to move on from players like that. They had the Randy Gregory debacle as well, but replace them, right? Like, you can't just take Amari Cooper away. Keep in mind, Michael Gallup tore his ACL in the penultimate game of the season last year. And granted, they did re-sign him, but they took Amari Cooper away. They traded him. And what'd they do? They signed James Washington. Okay. He got hurt in like the 3rd day of training camp, and they did nothing about that. Okay, well, they drafted Jalen Tolbert, Ed. So, be scared of him. He was their 3rd round pick. Watch out. He's been inactive so far this year. Okay. All right. Well, hey, Ed's looking at the state of the offensive line. The Cowboys have always had a great offensive line. I mean, it's going to be great, even though they cut Lyle Collins, right? Well, Tyron Smith, prior to this season, had missed time in 6 straight years. Dak Prescott, who I'm sure it feels like has been around forever, has never played an entire season with Tyron Smith. It's never happened. And so what did the Cowboys do to protect themselves in the event of a Tyron Smith injury? Nothing. They did nothing. They did spend the 5th round pick they got in the Amari trade on Matt Waletzko. Again, a 5th round pick out of North Dakota. And they relegated swing tackle duties. Again, this is a team. Swing tackle is important, whatever NFL team you're talking about. This is particularly important when you have Tyron Smith, who is seemingly an inevitable factor when it comes to injuries. They relied on Josh Ball, who was their 4th round pick a year ago, kind of had a redshirt year, and Matt Waletzko. They were both terrible in the offseason or in the preseason and in training camp. So what'd they do? Nothing. Oh, it's going to be fine. Tyron's going to be great. Don't worry about it. We got Tyler Smith inside at left guard. Tyron gets hurt. Whoa. Oh my gosh, this was so unpredictable. Wow. How like, what are we supposed to do? So this was not even 3 weeks ago, Ed. And this is one of my current issues with some Cowboys fans. They go out, they sign Jason Peters. Okay. Thank goodness, right? They finally did it. They were painted into a corner. They signed Jason Peters. But in the meantime, because they waited 2 weeks to sign somebody after Tyron got hurt, their rookie 1st round pick, Tyler Smith, who exclusively got work at left guard throughout camp in the preseason, they kick him out to tackle. He plays well. Respect. Good job, Cowboys. Dunk on me. Take your victory lap. Tyler Smith looks great. But now, Ed, they're talking about, well, do we really want to play Jason Peters at left tackle? Should we play him at guard? Should we kick him out to right tackle? Because Tyler Smith has played well in 2 whole games. So who are we to deny 2 whole games in the face of Jason Peters, who's been playing left tackle in the NFL since Ed and Dave were trading rock and chisel questions at Big Blue View and Blogging the Boys. And so they're a purely reactionary team. They won a game last week that nobody expected them to win, and good for them. But it does kind of feel like that's going to their heads a little bit. I mean, again, like how can you look at Tyler Smith and say that's a better option at left tackle than Jason Peters in the here and now? Those are just small examples of who they are.
Exactly. I hear you. Let's talk a little bit about the game that they won last week. They win a game against the Cincinnati Bengals, who I'm starting to wonder if they're as good as I thought they might be this year. But they beat the Bengals with Cooper Rush playing quarterback. Now, Cooper Rush is now 2-0 as an NFL starting quarterback. And my question for you is what did he do that helped the Cowboys win a game? And Cooper Rush is a guy that the Giants looked at and basically booted off their practice squad in place of Clayton Thorson, who's another guy something about. So what did he do that helped them win? And is whatever he's doing, is it sustainable for Dallas for a few weeks until Prescott comes back?
Well, first of all, it was hilarious that one of the first things to happen to the Giants after hiring Jason Garrett was bringing in Cooper Rush and Clayton Thorson. Players, we see that all the time, right? Ron Rivera brings Curtis Samuel to Washington. Oh, it's going to be amazing because it was amazing in Carolina. I'd say what Cooper did well was probably stay out of the way and benefit from good luck. I mean, like what you're saying is kind of been the conversation all week, and Jerry had some comments that were really annoying about this. But Cooper Rush led the Cowboys to victory. Okay, and they scored 2 touchdowns in there. They've scored 2 touchdowns all season, by the way. They scored 2 touchdowns in that game. Both of them came in the first quarter. The first one was their opening possession of the game, scripted drive. Kellen, I hope you can execute your scripted drive to perfection. But you did, so kudos to you. The second touchdown was aided by a 46-yard pitch to Tony Pollard. So what did Cooper Rush do well against the Bengals? He threw the ball 10 feet to Tony Pollard, right? And then Tony took care of the rest and took them down to the 1-yard line. And even then, I mean, the Cowboys won on a game-winning field goal. That final drive, I'm not sure how much of that game you watched or have seen in the aftermath. Cooper, throwing to Noah Brown, who's now one of the best receivers on the Cowboys in lieu of Amari Cooper's absence. One of the more critical catches of that drive, the ball was tipped. The ball was tipped and winds up in the hands of Noah Brown. So if Cooper Rush can perfectly execute a tipped pass that still winds up in the hands of his receivers every week, then yeah, I mean, we're cooking with gas here. But is it sustainable? I mean, maybe. I mean, a lot of that depends on how hollow you feel like the 2-0 Giants are, how legitimate you feel like the 1-1 Commanders are, right? Because those are their next 2 teams. After that, they play the Rams in LA. They're a little bit down on their luck too, right? Even though they won last week. And after that, they're on Sunday Night Football against the Eagles. 3 of these next 4 games are in division for the Cowboys. And that's kind of why they didn't do anything with their roster, because they kind of counted on being able to just walk over the NFC East because they've been able to do it for so long.
Well, you talk about the NFC East and you talk about schedules, and is the Giants 2-0 record hollow? And I look at it this way. They've won 2 games by 4 points against 2 teams that I don't think are all that good. And Tennessee Titans fans will be upset about that, but Tennessee just lost to the Giants, and they looked like a peewee football team playing against the Bills. I mean, I think that Tennessee has been good for a while, but I think they're on the downslide.
Sure.
The reality of it is the Giants could easily be 0-2. Randy Bullock makes a perfectly makeable 47-yard field goal, and they lose week 1. Week 2 is a 3-point game that they win on a 56-yard Graham Gano field goal. And what I will say about those games is the Giants have generally lost those kinds of games over the last few years. But it was nice to win them, but so many NFL games are last possession games. So many NFL games are 1-score games. You don't know how those things are going to go week in and week out. And if you're in them every week, you'll win some, you'll lose some. Sometimes the ball bounces your way, and sometimes it doesn't. So is the Giants 2-0 record hollow? I don't know if I would call it that, but I'm also not going to look at them and say they're fixed. They're in competition for the NFC East title. They're a team that's ready to make a deep playoff run. I'm not going to say that until I see that.
Sure, and I think that's fair. And I would look at the Cowboys' offensive performance in week 2 against the Bengals, and I would say that that is hollow. I don't think that that's something they can replicate. Good for them. They did it, right? Like, they executed their game plan. They deserve all the credit in the world for that, but it isn't sustainable. The thing that is sustainable for them is the defensive side of the ball. Now, to be fair, a big talking point we had all offseason was that there was going to be regression when it came to turnovers. There was going to be regression no matter what. And a lot of fans, no, you don't know that. They could take the ball away more. Sure, it's possible. But in all likelihood, 100 years of data shows us that regression is more likely than not. And so we're seeing that through 2 games last year, the Cowboys had 6 takeaways. Through 2 games this year, they have 2. But despite that fact, despite that loss of 4, I do think this defense is better. They're more sound, they're more physical. Those are tropes and cliches. But again, I don't know if you saw the end of the Cowboys-Bengals game. Trayvon Diggs had a critical 3rd down stop that was all about physicality, and he had a big stop on 2nd down right before that. And so he's not intercepting the ball. He's not taking it away in that sense, but he is growing and developing as a corner. Micah Parsons, I mean, we already talked about it, but I mean, the dude has 4 sacks through 2 games. I mean, he is a difference. He is an X factor. And the Cowboys had 4 non-Micah Parsons sacks against the Bengals, and I would say that 3 of them were a direct result of the pressure created by Micah Parsons. And so, is that sustainable? Can he do that every single week? Probably not, right? We've seen it happen sparingly. Lawrence Taylor is the player he gets compared to often. I'm sure you're aware of. Can he be that guy? Can he single-handedly will the Cowboys to victory every week with a lackluster offense in an era where offense wins 9 out of 10 times? It's possible. I like his odds against Daniel Jones more than I did against Joe Burrow, and it worked out, then. So when you have a turnover-prone quarterback like Jones and you have somebody who's great at wreaking havoc like Micah Parsons, it does make me lean a little bit more towards the Cowboys when we do all the math like we've done here.
Right. Let me ask you this, though, before we get into predicting Monday night's outcome. Does anything the Cowboys really do this season really matter? Because I think we all know Sean Payton's going to be the head coach next year.
I have 2 answers for that. 1, I don't think it matters. But 2, I don't know that I think Sean Payton's going to be the head coach. I mean, that's, to your point, 3 years ago, we were sitting here saying, yeah, I mean, well, Jason Garrett's on his last legs and Lincoln Riley is going to be this team's head coach, right? Like, that was the kind of, take for 2 years at that point in time was Lincoln was going to move south, whatever it is, 60, 70 miles and start working out of AT&T Stadium full time instead of just in the Big 12 championship game. And so, I mean, the predictable thing doesn't always happen. The chalk thing doesn't always happen. I would honestly, I mean, look, if the Cowboys sign Sean Payton, a huge part of me, or trade for him, a huge part of me will love that, but a huge part of me will be disappointed. They need a clean reset if they do move on from Mike McCarthy, and they didn't even get that when they brought in Mike McCarthy. They retained Kellen Moore, who was part of the Scott Linehan tree, who was part of the Jason Garrett tree. I mean, to some degree, the Cowboys have had some involvement or some inspiration from Jason Garrett on their team since that 2007 season you mentioned. That was when they hired Jason Garrett from Miami to be their offensive coordinator before they hired Wade Phillips. He was the offensive coordinator for 3 full seasons, then took over for Wade Phillips, and then that got us here. And Kellen Moore was kind of his protege, the new Jason Garrett. So I feel so badly for Mike McCarthy. I don't find him to be a great coach. I do think he's done a lot of things differently than Jason Garrett. Just as an example of that, Garrett was 1-13 in games without Dak Prescott or Tony Romo, not factoring in the interim season. He wasn't the full-time head coach, but Mike McCarthy is 6-7 in games without Dak Prescott. There's no way. I mean, you've seen Jason Garrett recently. There's no way the Cowboys would have won against the Bengals without Dak Prescott if Jason Garrett was their head coach.
Right. So let's talk about Monday night. Now, your readers at Blogging the Boys know that I looked at this game, and I look at it as a 50-50 game. I look at it as either way. I think the Giants are favored by 1.5 or 2 points. And I've actually picked Dallas to win this game. As much as I don't want to do that, I just look at the Giants and I think this Giants team at 3-0, I never would have predicted it. I don't see it as a 3-0 team. The Giants play the Bears in week 4, and people are already talking about the Giants going 4-0. And maybe that happens. It's entirely possible. Maybe they win Monday night. Maybe they beat the Bears on Sunday. Maybe they are 4-0. I still don't see them as an 11-12 win team. They're not fixed. They're not that yet. I go back to, I think, in Sean McDermott's first year in Buffalo, they were surprisingly good. And then they regressed in their second year. Maybe that's what we're going to see under Brian Daboll. Maybe they're surprisingly good in year one, and then some sort of standard regression happens in year two. So I'm picking Dallas for the simple reason that I just don't think the Giants can go 4-0 here. And I think they're more likely to lose a game to Dallas than they are to Chicago. So that's it. That's it for me.
I think that's fair logic. I do think that by the end of week 4, the Giants have 3 wins. I do think that they're going to beat the Bears. So I think the floor is 3 wins through the first. I know it's not the first quarter anymore, but it always will be to me, despite the regular season growing. I'm taking the Cowboys too. And I've done a few Giants podcasts this week. I say this with all due respect. I just don't think Daniel Jones is good enough. He's in the fact that he's not good enough, and he's so turnover prone. It's just a bad formula in general, let alone when you're going up against what might be the most dominant defensive player in the NFL right now in Micah Parsons. And so, if we have to play games, right, like, well, who has the advantage here? I think it's kind of a wash at quarterback. I would give Dallas a slight edge at head coach. I mean, again, I'm not high on Mike McCarthy, but Brian Daboll's in his 3rd NFL game as a head coach. So if I'm picking like who has an insane advantage, where is it? It's the Cowboys on the defensive side of the ball because of Micah Parsons, so they can get to Daniel Jones. I mean, they surrendered less than 300 yards of total offense last week, Dallas did, and they didn't even force any turnovers. And so, if the offense can just get enough done against, and I agree with you, Cincinnati's obviously got some question marks here in 2022, but if they can get it done against an offense that we know has elite potential, they should be able to stymie the Giants enough. And if a turnover can cause a short field, and Dallas doesn't have to score a lot, but if they get those limited, easier opportunities, I could kind of see them running away with it in that sense. I don't think it's a big time score runaway. I think we're talking something like 2017 again, 2016, 24-21 type thing. I think it's probably closer than Cowboys fans would like, but I do think that Dallas ultimately wins and therefore covers.
Yeah, it's interesting. The one thing I will say is I posted our weekly SB Nation Reacts polling at Big Blue View on Friday afternoon. And I don't know if you saw this, but I asked if Giants fans approved so far of the way that Daniel Jones had played through 2 games. 68% said they approved of the way that he's playing. And if Monday night doesn't go well, I don't think I want to do that poll again.
But you know what? I mean, and I that's where I think if I was a Giants fan, it's hard, but I know you do a great job. Like, you have to temper expectations. And look, Tyrod Taylor has been a fine quarterback in the NFL, but he shouldn't touch the field at all this year. If you're a Giants fan, and I understand the likelihood of re-signing him in the offseason is low, but every snap of this year has to go to Daniel Jones, so you can say you looked under every rock to determine whether or not he's a franchise quarterback. Because if you're going to say no, that's a big thing, and you have to make sure you did the work on that.
Absolutely, because and I've done the research on this, and I think since 2010, of the quarterbacks drafted in the first round, I think you could call, if you look at, Pro Bowl, All Pro, is the guy a top 12 quarterback in the NFL? I think maybe you could define 30% of the guys drafted in round 1 as that. So when you've got a guy who was drafted in the top 10 and you've got to exhaust every possibility before you move on.
I think that's well said. And I mean, you can't undo all of what Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge did in one fell swoop, right? This is a process. It's like when you have a cold, and Micah Parsons actually has a cold right now, but you have that one morning you wake up and you like sweated the infection out. You have to do it. You know what I mean? You have to go through that before you can truly begin the healing process.
Yes, you do, and I'll just say that I'm dealing with some back issues right now, and I think that's where I am. I'm sort of working through the process, and I think that's what the Giants are doing as well. RJ, thank you as always, and I hope you enjoy the game on Monday night, but obviously, not too much.
Likewise, Ed. Health, wealth, and happiness to you and yours. But nothing but sports misery for you, and I mean that on a Giants and Yankees
and
level. Just so we're
and
clear.
I was going to say, maybe we'll have to wager a little something, if and when we get to Yankees Astros.
I mean, obviously, if we lose that, I'll be devastated. But it has to happen. You know what I mean? Like this, the sport of baseball, we need it. We need Astros, Yankees, ALCS. We need that series. Baseball deserves it. Sports deserves it. So I'm willing to risk devastation in the name of something great.
All right. Thank you very, very much for a little bit of time, RJ. Giants fans, thank you as always for listening. Please remember to stay safe out there, take care of each other, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.